Around 375 miles from Ukraine and about 388 miles southeast of Moscow lies PENZA, the administrative center of the PENZA Oblast. The city is Russia's 36th largest and is home to a manufacturing plant that makes radio equipment. That plant made PENZA a target, and on July 31st, news broke that Ukraine had struck. Once again, Ukraine crushes Russia's defenses with a massive drone swarm that has devastated the PENZA facility. PENZA burns, and all hell has erupted thanks to the latest deep strike that has plunged a dagger into the heart of Putin's Russian Empire. News of the strikes comes courtesy of the Kyiv Independent, which reports that the Security Service of Ukraine, or SBU, sent a horde of drones into PENZA. Their target was the city's radio electronics plant, which the outlet says builds military-grade radio equipment used by Russian President Vladimir Putin's forces in Ukraine. Initial information comes from an anonymous SBU source who spoke to the Kyiv Independent. At least 11 explosions were recorded, the source claims, suggesting that several of Ukraine's drones managed to strike their targets. All of those explosions were the result of a massive fire at the JSC Radio Zavod plant in PENZA, which is a sanctioned facility that is operated by the state-owned Rostec Defense Corporation. That gives us an idea of what happened. Ukraine's drones hit their target. That target erupted into flames. The Kyiv Independent says that Russia reported mass Ukrainian strikes across several oblasts during the early hours of July 31st, confirming that Ukraine did indeed send a drone horde into Russia. More importantly, there's footage of the radio plant that proves Ukraine hit its mark. Shared by the Astra Telegram channel, the 54-second video seems somewhat innocuous at first. The sky is cloudy, and it looks like smoke is already streaming into the air. But at the 8-second mark, you see it, a Ukrainian drone quickly peeping out of the clouds before being hidden away again as it courses through the skies. The camera pans out as the drone continues to pop in and out of view. It then pans out further to show us the drone's target, the PENZA radio manufacturing plant. And it's already on fire. The drone starts its descent toward the plant, seemingly unencumbered by Russia's air defenses. It's difficult to determine if those defenses even activated because the video has no sound. However, no missiles are flying up to meet the drone. There are no flashes of heavy gunfire to suggest that Russia's air defenses had activated. The drone then touches down, exploding into a ball of flame on the ground of the already smoking factory. Based on this footage, we know that at least 2 of Ukraine's drones hit their targets. The one seen in the video and the drone that had caused the fire that was already raging when the footage started. Russia can't deny what just happened. Ukraine just accomplished another successful deep strike on its territory. Astra's brief commentary on the video also suggests that people in PENZA have reported that Ukraine's drones were successful. Local residents report that a blow was inflicted on JSC Radio Zavod. Earlier, Astra's analysis of the footage of the fire in PENZA confirmed that after a UAV attack, the territory in the area of 2 local factories, one of which is JSC radio plant, caught fire. The Kyiv Independent's unnamed source provides more details about what Ukraine hit. They say that the PENZA plant produces a host of automated combat control systems used in several branches of Russia's military, ranging from artillery units to the Russian Air Force. In other words, it supports almost all of Russia's military operations, making shutting the plant down a priority. Preliminary reports indicate that the plant's new production facility and warehouses with components were hit, the SBU source says. So Ukraine may have taken out the PENZA plant's ability to build its radio and communications equipment, along with taking out storage facilities containing the components used to build that equipment. That's a 1-2 punch, and it has left Putin reeling. Not that you'd know if you'd only listened to the Russian response to Ukraine's devastating strike. The PENZA Oblast governor, Oleg Melnichenko, initially offered very little information, stating simply, "There is a fire at the plant, which is being extinguished." But later, Melnichenko was forced to admit there was a problem. Euromaidan Press reports him as saying, "There are no casualties and no destruction. There is a fire on the territory of the enterprise, which is now being eliminated." The same old Russian response. Denial, denial, denial. Melnichenko's claims that there was no destruction came even as Russian telegram channels filled with videos showing that he was lying through his teeth, such as the one that Astra shared. His message itself is contradictory. How can there be no destruction at the same time as a fire rages at the PENZA plant? Doesn't make sense, but that's not what will matter to Putin. As long as his officials deny what's happening, Putin can at least try to undermine Ukraine's achievements. At least this time, Russia didn't try to claim that it was drone debris that caused the problem. Instead, it's acting like there's barely any problem at all beyond a small fire. The footage Astra shared, along with the Kyiv Independent's SBU source, tells us what really happened. The PENZA factory was hit hard and at least twice by Ukraine's drones. But why does that even matter? We've touched on the answer to this question already with our mentions of the PENZA facility being responsible for manufacturing much of the radio and electronic equipment used in Russia's military. A little more insight into what the plant does comes from its official website. The site is barely functioning and is filled with broken hyperlinks, but it does have an About page, which says, JSC Radio Zavod plays a very important role in the industrial, economic and social life of PENZA and the PENZA region. Its rich experience of international military technical cooperation has been accumulated for years. Special purpose equipment manufactured on the factory is always in demand and is being successfully operated in more than 20 countries around the globe. So this is clearly a facility that operates at scale. You don't build products for over 20 countries if your factory isn't important. The website also confirms that the factory builds automated complexes for artillery systems, in addition to similar complexes for army air defense and other armament. Plus, it plays a key role in Russia's attempts to modernize its military. The scientific and technical center of the factory carries out a great deal of scientific research and engineering works for developing and manufacturing of electronic radio equipment of various purposes, data processing and converting systems, software and hardware complexes, the website boasts. It won't be doing much of that research anymore. At least not until the fire caused by Ukraine's drones is put out and the factory is rebuilt. Beyond that, it's difficult to glean much more about what the PENZA plant does because the website is a broken mess, but what we do know is enough to prove that it was a legitimate target for Ukraine. The site confirms that the plant is owned by Rostec and has been since 2013, meaning it's deeply entrenched into the Russian military-industrial complex Putin has created in Russia since he launched his invasion. This isn't just any old factory, it's a key cog in Putin's war machine and one that he absolutely cannot afford to lose. And it gets worse for Russia's leader. The PENZA facility wasn't the only thing that Ukraine targeted with its drone horde on the night of July 31st. Ukraine also hit Volgograd. That's according to the Astra Telegram channel, which says that an overnight drone attack in the region reportedly targeted a key railway station and gas supply. And just as with the PENZA plant, Astra comes with receipts in the form of video footage. A 15-second clip shows a fire blazing in the distance. The video also briefly shows the frontage of the Baranka Motel and Cafe, which is located on the Severnaya Street in Volgograd. Russia can't deny this one. After all, there's no reason for such a massive blaze to appear if not for a Ukrainian drone strike. Russia has at least confirmed that Ukraine sent drones into the Volgograd region. But as is so often the case, the Volgograd governor, Andrei Bocharov, has attempted to downplay the severity of the Ukrainian strike. In an official statement, Bocharov said, "Tonight, the air defense forces of the Ministry of Defense of Russia repelled a massive UAV attack on objects in the transport and energy sphere of the Volgograd region. There are no victims. Fires of dry grass were recorded in the Suroviky district, which were promptly extinguished by fire services. In the Kotelnikovsky district, the gas supply of about 65 private households has been disrupted. Experts are liquidating the consequences." Again, no mention of any direct hits. But what do you expect from Russia? Though the usual drone debris excuse hasn't been trotted out, it's at least implied by Bocharov's claims that Russia's air defenses shot down all the drones that Ukraine sent. The Kyiv Independent adds that Russia's defense ministry is claiming that it shot down 32 Ukrainian drones over 6 regions on the July 31st overnight attack, including 11 over Volgograd. Residents also report hearing at least 5 explosions in Volgograd, though whether those explosions were caused by Ukrainian drones being shot out of the skies or the result of those drones scoring direct hits on their targets hasn't been confirmed. Russia is reeling. The Volgograd strike was small potatoes compared to the loss of the PENZA plant, but both strikes will be damaging to Putin. And here are the reasons why. First, what we saw on the night of July 31st was just more examples of how Ukraine has ramped up its campaign of deep strikes against Russia since the beginning of 2025. If Russia has been paying attention, it would have known that these strikes were coming. As soon as former President Joe Biden permitted Ukraine to start using US-made ATACMS weapons on Russian territory in November 2024, the gloves came off. A red line was crossed, and Ukraine committed itself to going all in on hitting vital military infrastructure inside Russia. But Ukraine was never going to be able to rely on Western missiles alone to conduct these deep strikes. That's why it started building its own. In December 2024, the Atlantic Council offered plenty of hints that Ukraine was starting to build a more expansive deep strike arsenal. It reported on the unveiling of a brand new missile drone named the Peklo, which translates to Hell in Ukrainian. It was capable of traveling up to 435 miles per hour for up to 435 miles. That drone was just one of many long-range weapons Ukraine had developed by the end of last year, which included a new variant of its Neptune missile, and there are plans within Ukraine to build 30,000 long-range drones in 2025 alone. The warning signs were there. Ukraine was going to start hitting more targets inside Russia in 2025. Those warnings have come to pass. By February of this year, Euromaidan Press reported that long-range strikes against Russian military bases, arms factories, oil hubs, and similar facilities had become very common. The strategic shift had taken place, with Ukraine hitting Russia with its long-range weapons 66 times between October 2024 and January 2025. These types of strikes have only grown more intense and numerous, with the July 31st 1-2 strike in Penza and Volgograd being the latest in a list far too long to dive into in this video. Ukraine also believes that this strategy is working. On June 27th, United 24 media published comments made by Ukraine's defense minister, Rustem Umerov. Last year, Ukraine developed a plan for systematic long-range operations and contracted several tens of thousands of long-range drones, Umerov said on June 27th. This has made it possible to regularly carry out high-precision strikes against critical targets deep behind enemy lines. Possibility is now being turned into action. About 2 weeks ago, a decision was made to increase the number of operations several times over, Ukraine's defense minister added. The message was clear: Ukraine was already hitting Russia hard with long-range strikes, and it's now loading up to throw some real haymakers. But why? Some could make the argument that Ukraine should be focusing far more on the defense of its own territory than on deep strikes into Russian territory. However, that argument ignores the fact that Ukraine's deep strikes are exploiting several weaknesses that are resulting in them causing severe pain for Putin, including and beyond the loss of key manufacturing facilities, like the PENZA plant. Russia's sheer size is one of those weaknesses. Russia is the world's largest country, measuring in at about 6.6 million square miles. While that's a point of pride for many inside Russia, it also creates a massive problem that is making Ukraine's deep strikes possible. Russia is simply too large to defend. That's the point United 24 media made in a June article written by Ivan Komenko. Logistical and defensive challenges abound for Russia, as noted by former Deputy Chief of Ukraine's General Staff Ihor Romanenko. Komenko reports that Romanenko claims that Russia's sheer size offers maximal capabilities for strikes. In other words, Ukraine can take the bigger they are, the harder they fall approach to Russia. Frankly, it would be foolish for Ukraine not to hit Russia with strikes like the Penza attack because the opportunities are there in abundance. Ukraine has the weapons, it has the approval of the West, and it also knows that Putin isn't going to escalate beyond what he's already doing. So Ukraine is using more deep strikes because it's exploiting Russia's built-in territorial weakness. Speaking of territory, that brings us to the second reason why Ukraine is using this strategy. Every successful Ukrainian deep strike limits Russia's ability to supply, coordinate, or support its troops in Ukraine, which means those soldiers are less able to snatch up the Ukrainian territory that Putin wants them to take. It's no coincidence that Russia's territorial gains have slowed to a crawl in 2025, right around the time that Ukraine went all in on its deep strike strategy. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, pointed this out in June, noting that Russia's ground campaign has become so mired down that it's seizing limited territory while losing massive numbers of equipment and troops. Russia is advancing at speeds as slow as 164 feet per day in highly contested regions like Kharkiv, which is slower than the advances made by the French and UK forces during the brutal Battle of the Somme. CSIS also points out that Russia had only managed to capture 1% of Ukraine between January 2024 and the time of its article's June 2025 publication. More numbers come from Russia Matters, which publishes regular report cards covering how Russia's troops are doing. On July 22nd, it had some good news for Putin. Russia had taken 20% more territory in June than it had in the previous month. The bad news, that territory only amounted to 234 square miles of Ukraine, which is a minuscule amount given that these captures are coming amidst Putin's massive summer offensive. By July, the territorial gains were slowing down again, even as that offensive raged. The first week of that month saw Russia capture only 18 square miles, which is its lowest weekly rate since the end of April. If you're wondering what the strike against the PENZA plant has to do with all of this, it's simple. Those strikes cause problems for Putin's forces on the ground. In the case of the PENZA strike, Russia loses the ability to build artillery and other weapon systems that use the automated systems PENZA produces. That amounts to less artillery being sent to the front lines. With less artillery, Russia's forces aren't as effective as they would otherwise be, making it easier for Ukraine to defend against them. More of Russia's offensives fail, less of Ukraine is captured, and every successful deep strike conducted against Russia only exacerbates the problem. So PENZA and strikes like it expose Russia's weakness to long-range attacks and cause major problems for Putin's forces on the ground in Ukraine. But there's another reason why Ukraine is so focused on deep strikes in 2025. They make Putin look weak. Putin's ability to reign over Russia is rooted in his projection of himself as the great protector of his nation. Russia's leader fancies himself as a strongman, which is a political archetype that is popular in Russia. The country likes strong leaders who are capable of defending it from any potential threat. Putin's problem is that his image of himself as Russia's protector and the reality he now faces are two very different things. The Conversation pointed this out in an August 2024 article that came in the wake of Ukraine's successful counter-invasion of the Russian region of Kursk. That counter-invasion was humiliating for Putin. It represented the first time that enemy troops had occupied Russian territory since World War II, and it happened on Putin's watch. Incidents like these humiliate Putin. But more worryingly for Russia's leader, they puncture the picture of protector that he has spent most of his reign trying to paint. At the time, the conversation said, "The Ukrainian advance is the most serious challenge to Putin's narrative of the war since the invasion began. It also risks making the Russian leader look vulnerable and weak." It's those two words that matter, vulnerable and weak. Those are the last things that Putin wants to appear to his people, because he knows that his reign as president will stand on increasingly shaky ground the weaker he is perceived. Some would already say that he's at that point. Johns Hopkins University says that Putin is a weak strongman who is too strong to be thrown out of power, but too weak to govern effectively. In other words, the shattering of Putin's strongman image makes it harder for him to lead his people, or perhaps, more importantly, make those people trust the idea that he is a capable leader. Deep strikes hammer the point home. Putin can't protect Russia. Perhaps that's the most important impact the July 31st PENZA and Volgograd strikes will ultimately have. Yes, they've caused damage, with the PENZA strike in particular creating problems for Putin's forces in Ukraine. However, these strikes and the many like them that Ukraine has carried out in 2025 also bring the war that Putin started right back to the Russian people. Putin can't pull the wall over his people's eyes forever. Over time, his previously iron grip on power will loosen as more and more Russians turn against him. As PENZA burns, Ukraine goes one step closer to unseating Putin. And while Putin is dealing with both the short and long-term problems caused by the PENZA strike, he has another issue to handle. Even nature itself seems to be running against Russia as a massive earthquake has hit one of Russia's most important nuclear submarine bases. Find out more in our video and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest deep strikes on Russian territory. And thank you, as always, for watching.